Arnold's Letter, a short horror story. Written by Michael Vandervoort. Narrated by Robin Reads. Dear Mother, I should begin by saying that I'm sorry. I know that Marie's death hit you hard in the days after the funeral. All you needed in the world was the shoulder of your son to cry upon. I know I wasn't there. I know that I should have been, and for that I am truly sorry. More so, however, I am sorry for the circumstances that led to my absence, the reason I couldn't be there, and the reason I can never let you weep for your child on any shoulder of mine. I know that when you read these words you will most likely throw down this letter in disgust, disregarding the rest of its message, and so I will tell you now. Throw it down. Walk away in tears. Vow to disown me and erase all memory that I ever was your child, but please do not destroy this letter. In the days, weeks, months, or years to come, when the sting has faded a little, the wound at least partially healed, you can come back to this letter and read what remains after the hurt. It is my story, my confession, and my reasons. First, however, I need to tell you, I killed Marie. As I anticipate that you will be returning to this letter, possibly damaged, after a long interval, please allow me to again say that I am sorry. It was not my intention to hurt you, or indeed Marie, whom I feel, in some ways perhaps, I may have granted a mercy. I am sorry for the pain I may have caused you, and any I may have caused her. I am not sorry for what I did, and, indeed, I wouldn't hesitate to do it again. Fear, dear mother, is an excellent motivator. Through one fear we can be pushed, coerced, or persuaded to overcome others. Like a man forced to walk the plank, the threat that pursues forces us forward, sometimes down roads paved with terrors. I have faced fear, mother, horror beyond what you can imagine, and yet I hold no regret. Call me a coward, but fear forced my hand, a hand I can still move. Marie was not so lucky. Do you remember, Mother, that really hot summer, when we filled buckets and mugs from the taps and had water fights in the streets? How you scolded us, half-heartedly, for wetting the floor, then spurted us with water from an empty bottle of washing-up liquid, laughing and running into the street yourself. I can see your apron, sodden, and your hair, usually so tidy and neat, falling wildly out of place as you chased us on the cobbled stones. Marie loved that. I remember her that day. I romanticize it. In my memory, her hair, hanging in straggly, knotted strands, drips water that catches the sunlight, and she, laughing and giggling as only little girls can, deliberately shakes her head so that the droplets fly at me. I watch her laugh in memory, watch her run away. Run. Laugh. That's how I want to remember her, not as what she became. I know there is a God. I don't believe, I know. If the dark things exist, and Mother, they do, then the light things must too. When I looked at Marie, though, I often wondered which, dark or light, our God was supposed to be. How could a God, a real, loving God, who cares for his children, do that to someone? People talk of Jesus as a shepherd caring for his flock. They forget that every shepherd sends some lambs to slaughter. I never forgot. When your supposedly loving God is so recklessly, needlessly cruel, well, it's time to find a new God. I knew she was in there, of course, long after the body shut down. Locked-in syndrome, they call it nowadays. Locked in, but in there. Her brain was aware. She was aware, but she couldn't move a muscle. Her only access to the world a strained blinking of one blue eye. Trapped, caged, and tortured. Jesus wept. When I looked at her, I still saw Marie, but all I could think about was our scruffy old dog, Pixie. Do you remember, Mother, when she was hit by a car? Her tiny body spun horizontally and landed on the pavement with a thick, wet slap. I carried her into the house. Holding her was like holding a huge bag of carrots. The tiny bones had no rigidity anymore. The pieces, broken and unattached within the sack of skin, tumbled and slipped over each other. I laid her in front of our old electric fire and watched her as she died. If ever you doubt and need proof of the soul, watch something die. You see, in a second, the life disappear. The body is emptied, vacated, transformed, becomes a shell, an echoing husk, still, inanimate, and empty. Pixie's carcass wasn't Pixie. Pixie was somewhere else. I saw the same in Marie, that separation of body and soul. But she wasn't somewhere else. She had stayed, here, awake. The body, the shell, was reduced to a husk. The spark, the animation, the spirit and essence that was her remained. It lived within its vessel of flesh, its vehicle body that fades when we die, caught and cursed to living death. We are no more our bodies than a driver is a motor car, Mother. The car can be crashed, dismantled and sold for scrap, whilst the driver who controlled it made it race and spin, stop and start, gave it life, gets out and goes on. Marie's soul gave her car life, until the car was crushed with the driver still inside. God shows us the soul is separate from the body by trapping one within the other. It's his cruelest joke. I never laughed, and Marie, poor Marie, couldn't. Run, laugh, nothing. That isn't fair. I wrote those words on my bedroom wall. Behind the bookshelf, they're still there now. Of all the symbols I have used, all those dark and twisted signs, it's those words and the accusation they hold against God and his supposed purpose that remain the darkest. Marie saw me do it. I'd carried her, dead weight but far from dead, into my room and placed her on my bed. I wanted her to know that I knew she was in there, to know what the doctor had told me, why I was planning to do what I did, and that I knew she was in there and able to hear me. It was Dr. Linson, the same doctor who gave me a sticker for being brave when I was small, who burned the wart off my back and gave me syrup for my cough. The same doctor I trusted and respected as a friend. It was the very same who told me, "It'll happen to you." Some round here have called me a witch, but he, a doctor, like oracles of old, told me the future not as a guess, but in iron, terrible certainties. "It will happen to you." He'd done the tests, could tell from the blood. Suddenly the warmth was gone, and just like God, this familiar figure who, in a way, I knew and loved, crushed everything that was me and mine into powder and wiped the dust from his hands. I would be inside, trapped like Marie. Run, laugh, nothing. It would happen to me. But it hasn't. Because, unlike Marie, I have had help. My God doesn't love me, but my God, at least, is fair. In many ways, a doctor is similar to a witch. Both have their herbs, their potions, and their books, and both can show what time seeks to conceal. Both, at times, are tiny gods. Where they differ is how they treat whispers in the dark. A doctor says they don't exist. A medium might turn an ear to listen. A witch, and only a witch, would choose to whisper back. It took me a year to pay for that book. I had some savings squirreled away, but only one half of the price he wanted. I showed him my wage slips, offered, if he would let me, to pay off the remainder in installments. For me, the clock was ticking. For him, it was not. He was unmoved. He'd made that mistake before, and, in his experience, with a few notable exceptions, those acquiring such books weren't around long enough after receiving them to pay off their debts. Not those owed to him, anyway. I explained that being one of those exceptions was the crux of my plan. "Isn't it always?" he sighed, before adding by way of caution. "If the book works, you'll have debts enough. Full payment in advance. No exceptions." And so, Mother, I waited. Over that year, I read. Devoured with omnivorous greed every mention I could find of the occult, demonology, and esoteric ritual magic. At first I refused to pay for other books, my sole object being to purchase that one volume that would give me what I needed, and instead travelled many miles, often walking, to numerous libraries and bookshops. Sometimes I would set off at night and walk until dawn. I'd stay all day, simply reading and making notes, and then, when night fell, I would walk back. At length, however, I discovered that with parsimony verging on torture, I could afford to put more aside. Some days I ate only bread, but if it came to the choice, bread or books, I ate nothing at all. But I bought the books, scores of them. You will remember, Mother, how my body changed, how your boy with ruddy cheeks withered and shrank across the month until he appeared as nothing more than a skeleton upon which someone had crudely painted skin. By the end of the year, I looked like Marie, and I began to feel like her too. It started in my hands, a quick spasm or a finger that wouldn't, when commanded, angle or bend as it should. Sometimes the simple act of lifting a spoon from a meagre bowl of soup became a near impossible task. My hand, as if held by some other force, would twitch and tremble till I strained and pulled the sinews of my wrist, trying in vain to control it. One terrible morning, I awoke to find I couldn't lift my head. The muscles in my neck, as if dissolved in the night, seemed to have liquefied, losing all tension, all control. Eventually, with a screaming wrench, I rolled to my side and the feeling finally returned. I lay on the bed, sobbing wildly, the panic and fear like nothing before. I looked down to find that I'd soiled myself for the first time since I was a child, and you had calmly cleaned me up. I panicked at the thought that I hadn't felt it, so hard-gripped had I been with fear. Fear that I had waited too long. The doctor had said around 3 years. Had I been cheated? Was it too late? To add to my indignity, I vomited loudly. That, Mother, is what real terror feels like. How, after that, could I ever fear the dark? That night, I bought the book. At first, for a month, nothing happened. Weeks before, I'd cleared my room. All that remained was a ragged mattress and a single ringed camping stove. The floor I had etched with circles and signs, symbols and names in salt and chalk. Some from above, some from below. Though I knew my calls would go one way. I stopped going to work. Every night I'd read the words and share the signs. Standing naked with only a candle, I'd trace the 5-point star in the air, open the space for all to come. I'd face and bow to the points required, move at junctures from one circle to the next, tracing geometries with my steps as incantations foul and fair spilt from my lips, proud and clear. Still nothing happened. When, Each morning I was forced with the light of dawn to trace that star backward again. To close the ritual, I would retreat to my corner and cry. Eventually, I realized that I could not cut corners, that I would need to perform the rituals exactly as stated and to use the materials as stipulated, making sure to adhere to every detail. That would require work, not only study, but actual physical labor and distance covered to acquire the things I needed. It isn't so easy in this day and age to simply find a goat. They don't tend to venture into the narrow entries and cobbled back streets of the cities. To get one, I had to go outside of the city. I took a train into the hills and was forced to kill time for hours waiting in a wooded area across from the field. Stealing the goat was harder than I thought, not only because the thing kicked and squirmed, making a terrible screeched racket, but because the noise it did make brought the dogs, running and snapping towards me. I barely made it over the barbed wire fence before they were on me. A few moments more and I would surely have been mauled. The kid bleated and writhed in terror, pushing against the walls of the canvas sack I had brought for the job, but slung over my shoulder it was easy enough to carry. Can you imagine, Mother, how difficult it was for me to smuggle that thing into the house without anyone seeing, especially you? How upsetting it was for me to eventually have to cut out its tongue to stop it from screeching and alerting people to its presence? Can you imagine how heartbreaking it was for me a week later to sink my shovel into the newly turned earth and desecrate the grave of a child? All so that I could pull from the lid the nails that fastened closed the coffin. And how shattered, like a glass, trampled to smithereens, I became, when, after killing the goat, scratching a thin strip of its leather out to form the circle, and pinning it down with those nails from the grave, nothing came as a result. All that answered was silence. I had done everything correctly, followed the instructions to the letter, and still had nothing to show for my trouble but darkness and the creeping inevitability of my own horrific fate, a fate that no one but our Marie would understand. Still, I did not give up. You always taught me that if at first you don't succeed, you must try and try again. So I did, every night. 2 weeks in, I told Marie. I like to think she understood, that she could see, despite it all, where and why I'd birthed my plan. Once, as I fed her, my hand began to shake. Her eyes were fixed, but something in them changed, and I knew she saw. I knew that she knew. It would happen to me. I told her my plan, picked up the chalk and walked to the wall. Run. Laugh. Nothing. I read the words aloud, less for her than for me. I stood before them, my back to her, allowing their horrible, unbent truth to seep and sink through each of my pores. Is this it? I asked her the question. Like all that I asked her, it became rhetorical. Is this God's plan? Suddenly, an anger, a fear, and a spite boiled up like venom and seared through my veins. Taking the chalk, beneath I scrawled, "I choose no. I choose no." I stared again at the wall. Then I turned and looked at Marie. "Free will?" I asked her empty stare. "He," I added, "is no god of mine." As expected, both Marie and God said nothing. Later that night I tried again. Nothing. Just a boy, naked in the dark, desperate and thin, reaching for anything. As the first streaks of dawn began to colour the sky, I knew that tears would follow. I began to believe it was over, that all hope was lost. For the first and only time, I considered ending it all. Rather death than this. I'd always been taught that suicide was a sin, the ultimate rejection of God's ultimate gift. But then, what gift was this? A present whose wrapping made the contents unusable? Was I, supposed to be grateful? To give the Almighty thanks for this broken gift? To consider myself lucky to view God's creation in rigid silence? To cry exultation for the endless procession of ceilings we'd see? I rolled onto my side and pressed my face against the bare wood, salt and chalk crusting my cheek as, curling, fetal, naked and pathetic, I sobbed to myself, muttering over and over that I choose no. It is only the trembling fawn, the smallest, weakest lambs, that catch the eyes of the wolf. So it was with me, and so it must be always. For only in the pit, the depths of desperation, clawing the sand at this, my lowest ebb, then and only then, did someone hear my call. For the first time in my life, I heard whispers in the dark. But it wasn't God who answered. At first I thought I'd dreamt it, that, as I had so many nights before, I'd cried myself to sleep, and somehow I had dreamt that thin and whispering voice. I propped myself up and stared into the darkness, staring towards the corner, and I knew, towards the cupboard. I thought how, as a child, I'd peeked from under the bedclothes, watched that door in horror, listening for a creak, watched for it to open just a tiny crack, for hands to slither snake-like out to grasp my leg. Now, sitting naked, a candle by my side, I stared again at the door as something in there spoke. The candle by my side I knew was almost spent. Soon it would expire, and I'd be there alone, groping in the dark. I held my breath and listened, straining now to hear clawing at the silence to the edge of sound. I sat in perfect stillness, every muscle taut, looking at the cupboard, listening for sounds behind the cupboard door. Something called my name. I stood, slowly, drenched in freezing sweat. I felt my breathing quicken as I forced myself to step, inching ever closer as my stomach seemed to melt. I felt a wave of nausea rising from its pit and, swallowing hard, wiped at my mouth with the back of one hand. The voice was tinny, somehow sounding thin. As I padded closer, it seemed somewhat to change, and somehow, through the shift in pitch, I heard the speaker smiling. I placed my hand upon the handle and felt a pang of doubt. Was there really, here, behind this flimsy door, something I had conjured up, that through my lines and symbols, my mutterings and murmurs, I had succeeded in dragging up something to hear from hell? And if it was, if all of that were true, did I really want to see it? This fiend from the pit? Did I want to see to prove all of this was real? All the good and evil, all the gods and monsters? In truth, I didn't know. Did I really want it? It didn't matter anyway. I knew what I didn't want. So, as my candle flickered and waned, I slowly turned the handle and drew back the door. The cupboard in my room was a room of its own, a recess or cubbyhole built into the wall. It stretched back for several feet. Now, standing before it, I peered into the dark. For a moment, behind the door, dark was all there was, just a square of blackness cut from the cloth of night. But then, a glimmer, maybe 4 feet up, a highlight in the blackness. The teeth of a smile. There was nothing else, or nothing I could see, just the mouth and lips, the edge of the chin hanging in the darkness, like some wicked Cheshire cat. All the rest was darkness, all around was black, so the mouth just hung there, a sickly, sickening grin. The gums were swollen, bloated and pink, of a shade you would usually not find there. A slightly putrid rose. They bulged, firm and plump with jagged, spaced-out teeth. The skin around was milky white, which made the teeth seem yellow, stretching out to wicked points like the fangs of an animal. I stood in the darkness and felt my bowels give way. It never gave a name. It wasn't always there, and after each conversation it made me close the door, as if it didn't want me to see what it was doing. The voice was hideous. Every wretched syllable curled in clicks of spit, gobs of drool spilling over those red lips in long elastic stretches that disappeared below. "Hello, Arnold," it said with a smile that made me retch. I spoke into the darkness, to this lonely light. I want it to stop. I want it not to happen. You can do that? You can make it stop? Yes. It spilled in awful, liquid sounds. The light veered madly as the candle in my hand shook with my trembling and flicked wax onto the floor. I tightened my grip on its waxy firmness and, steadying my hand, raised my chin imperiously. I swallowed hard and stiffened my resolve. "Okay," I said. "Tell me how." I wanted to ask that first night, to tell this thing what I wanted, needed, and have it take the prospect away. But I had read for nearly a year. By then I knew better. "I know, Mother, that you might not believe. Things in the cupboard. I'm sure you think me mad. But I am not mad, Mother. I tell you it was there. As real as you and I. I could have reached forward and touched it. It was there, Mother, and it knew my name. Demons, I'd read, are not to be believed. If they can, they'll trap you, if you give them a chance. To tell them what I wanted, I needed to be sure. Any request I made must be carefully wrought. With just a single stray word, one turn of phrase, it can twist the meaning, and then it will have you. So, on that morning I managed not to tell. I was brave and waited, Mother. In a way, you would be proud. I knew already what the thing would want. Nothing is shown for nothing, naught is done for naught. It would need a sacrifice, some spilling of blood. But when it finally told me, it hurt me just the same. I wrote my wish upon the wall, just as I'd done at Marie's. I scratched and changed and mixed the words, working, toiling to get the phrasing right. There must be no error, no room for manoeuvre. It needed to be clear, and it needed to take place. For the next 60 years, this is my wish. I do not want to end up like Marie. No locked-in syndrome will ever touch my body. In that time, I want my soul to be encased in moving tissue, to be able to go outside, to feel the sun upon me, to interact with the world around me. I will grow old, healthy, and strong. I want my limbs to move. In the event, I lost myself, deviated slightly. Still my words were clear, and I knew that thing was listening. A slow, mocking laughter before I heard it say, "Thy will be done, Master. Thy will be done." It was 2 days later that I finally killed Marie. The thing had said it needed it, for all I wished to happen. In the softest way, a pillow across her face. I watched again as the soul left the flesh, unmoving tissue, limbs that do not move, never able to go outside, to feel the sun upon her, never interacting with the world around her. I took her life and offered it to that thing in exchange for mine, so I could be free. I chose no. Our Marie died at 4:10. As far as I'm concerned, for years, she'd never lived. The following night, I closed the ritual, waved the pentangle backward. I dismissed that thing that asked such a price. It's been a year since that night, and all my symptoms have gone. The new doctor says it won't happen to me, yet I'm still not happy. For how could I be, Mother? My Marie is gone to who knows where. As the thing left that night, Slithering back from wherever it came, it smiled again and laughed. Then it hissed the words that cut me to the bone. "You will get your miracle, all that you have wished. You who never asked that both of you be well." I know that I didn't, Mother. I will always know. That will be my punishment for the next 60 years. I love you, Mother. Your son, Arnold. The words I've just reproduced were written sometime in the early 1960s. They represent a letter that extends to multiple pages and which, as you have heard, takes a very unusual direction. I found this letter in 2001, pressed between the pages of a Bible belonging to my great-aunt. Despite having never been close to her, and indeed only having a faint memory of having met her once during my childhood, as her only surviving relative, I was left both her house and its contents in her will. It was whilst clearing the house and looking through her sundry belongings that I stumbled across the words I have transcribed above. It is worth noting that in the form that I possessed them, these pages were in poor condition, having been torn and later taped back together. Clearly, the writer of these words correctly anticipated his mother's reaction and her subsequent return to the words at a much later date. The letter itself is now in the British Museum. I donated it alongside another much stranger item found at around the same time. When preparing the house for sale, I was required to cut down an old yew tree that stood within the grounds. A section of the tree was part of my donation. Within it, somehow, encased in its trunk, workers found the body of a sickly-looking young man. The tree's living tissue had grown and moved around him. He'd been able to feel the sun and able to go outside. His limbs, the limbs of the tree, forever moved, in any breeze that blew. Arnold, it seems, got his miracle. I hope beyond hope that soon enough he died, that his soul, trapped in the body, did not live on inside as the tree grew old, healthy, and strong. I fear, however, that from some dark place I hope never to go, a thing I hope never to meet, sees that tree and smiles. This has been Arnold's Letter, a short horror story, written by Michael Vandervoort, narrated by Robin Reads. Copyright 2023 by Michael Vandervoort. Production copyright by Michael Vandervoort.